21 and perpetually teetering on the brink of financial collapse. Elara was an art student at the city's most prestigious academy, a scholarship kid perpetually out of place amongst the trust fund artists. Her threadbare jeans and paint-splattered hoodie were a stark contrast to the designer activewear favored by her classmates. Rent was a constant, gnawing anxiety, and meals were often a creative exercise in stretching a single packet of instant noodles. Art supplies, those glorious tools of her trade, were a luxury she could barely afford. Every tube of paint, every sheet of quality paper, was a sacrifice, a decision made at the expense of something else. A bus fare, a decent coffee, a moment of fleeting comfort. Today, her stomach rumbled a mournful protest, a reminder that her lunch had been a single, sorry apple. She'd foregone the canteen to save a few precious coins for a new pencil. The ache was familiar, a dull throb she'd learned to ignore, channeling her hunger into the intensity of her strokes. As her gaze drifted from the oak, she noticed him. An elderly man, hunched on a bench beneath a weeping willow, was also sketching. He wasn't merely sketching. He was lost in it, his movements fluid and precise, utterly absorbed. His clothes were disheveled, a faded tweed coat too large for his frame, and his gray hair, long and unkempt, framed a face etched with 1,000 stories. Beside him, propped against the bench, was a battered, unmistakably lived-in van, the kind you saw lingering in forgotten corners of industrial estates, not parked in a prime spot in Harrington Park. A pang of empathy shot through Elara. She knew that look, the intense focus, the slight tremor of the hand, the quiet desperation of someone pouring their soul onto paper. It was the look of a true artist, and it transcended the superficial details of his worn attire. He looked poor as she felt, perhaps even more so. A small, crinkled brown paper bag sat beside her, holding her last possession of value until her next ramen packet. A half-eaten sandwich, hastily made that morning, a meager offering of stale bread and some wilting lettuce. It wasn't much, but it was something. And then her eyes fell on her own art supplies, scattered beside her on the bench. A few good pencils, a needed eraser, and a small, cherished set of professional-grade charcoal sticks she'd splurged on after a particularly grueling commission. A wave of warmth, a genuine unburdened kindness, washed over her. She knew the sting of an empty stomach, the yearning for better tools. Without a second thought, driven by an impulse that bypassed logic and self-preservation, she pushed herself up from the bench. Her movements were hesitant at first, a natural shyness warring with her compassionate urge. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice a little softer than she intended. The old man startled, his head snapping up, his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a flicker of surprise, then something akin to wariness. He looked at her, then at the sandwich bag, then back at her, his expression unreadable. I noticed you sketching," Elara continued, holding out the sandwich. "And, well, it looks like you've been at it for a while. I have an extra sandwich, if you'd like it." The lie tasted a little bitter, but it was for a good cause. He hesitated, his gaze still sharp, assessing. Then a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, transforming his weary face. "That's very kind of you, young lady," he said, his voice surprisingly deep, a resonant baritone that belied his disheveled appearance. He took the sandwich, his fingers brushing hers, and she noted that it was surprisingly well manicured, despite the faint smudges of charcoal. "And," Elara pressed on, emboldened by his acceptance, I have a few spare supplies. These are really good charcoal sticks. I find them excellent for landscapes." She picked up her small bundle of charcoal, offering them to him. She knew the value of good materials, how they could elevate one's art, and the thought of another artist struggle with inferior tools pricked at her heart. He looked at the charcoal, his blue eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He picked one up, turning it over in his calloused fingers, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps nostalgia, perhaps appreciation, in his gaze. "These are indeed excellent," he said, his voice softer now, a hint of genuine pleasure in his tone. "Thank you. You're very generous." "It's nothing," Elara mumbled, a blush creeping up her neck. "Just, us artists have to stick together, right?" She gave a small, self-deprecating shrug, already feeling a little awkward in the sudden silence that settled between them. She wanted to linger, to talk more about art, but her inherent shyness held her back. He merely nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face, his gaze lingering on her. He didn't say much more, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made Elara feel seen, understood, in a way few people ever did. She gave him a small wave and retreated to her own bench, her heart a little lighter, her hunger a little less acute. She didn't know his name or anything about him, other than the fact that he was an artist and, like her, seemed to be struggling. What she didn't know was that the man she just shared her last provisions with was Arthur Vance, a reclusive billionaire art collector, who, for reasons far more complex than poverty, was deliberately living a life of disguise. The sandwich, the art supplies, they were small gestures, but to Arthur Vance, experiencing life outside his gilded cage, they were a profound testament to genuine, unadorned human kindness. The park, for Elara, transformed into a secret meeting place. After that first encounter, she found herself drawn back, not just with familiar comfort of sketching, but for the quiet hope of seeing art again. And he was always there, usually under the weeping willow, his presence a steady anchor in her often turbulent days. Their conversations began tentatively, fragments exchanged between strokes of charcoal and the rustling of leaves. Elara, initially shy, found herself opening up to this enigmatic stranger in a way she rarely did with her peers. Perhaps it was his age or the gentle, non-judgmental way he listened, but there was an ease in his company that felt like a balm. She spoke of her struggles with her art, the frustration of a line that wouldn't flow, the elusive quality of light she desperately tried to capture. She confided her anxieties about money, the relentless pressure of looming deadlines and empty cupboards. She spoke of her dreams, grand and terrifying, of creating art that truly mattered, of leaving her mark on the world beyond the confines of her small, shared apartment. Art, in turn, offered insights that struck Elara with their profound simplicity. He didn't speak in lofty art historical terms or philosophical riddles, as some of her professors did. Instead, he spoke of observation. See not just with your eyes, but with your soul, child, he'd often murmur, his gaze fixed on a distant cloud or a scurrying squirrel. He spoke of patience. The hand learns at its own pace, but the eye must be ceaseless in its practice. He spoke of passion. If it doesn't burn within you, it won't ignite in the viewer. His words were like perfectly placed brushstrokes, clarifying and enriching her understanding without overwhelming her. He never spoke of himself, his past, or how he came to live in a van. His personal life remained a closed book, a mystery Elara, out of politeness and a burgeoning sense of respect, never dared to probe. For Arthur Vance, these interactions were a revelation, a stark and refreshing contrast to the gilded cage of his usual existence. In his mansion, surrounded by priceless art and even more priceless solitude, every conversation was weighted with expectation. Every interaction filtered through the lens of his wealth and power. People sought his favor, his connections, his opinions on the market. They rarely sought him. But Elara saw him, not Arthur Vance, the billionaire, the titan of industry, the reclusive art collector. She saw art, the fellow artist, the kindred spirit. She saw the lines etched on his face, the faint tremor in his hand, the shared intensity in his gaze when they discussed the merits of a particular shade of blue. Her genuine kindness, her unaffected passion for art, her raw vulnerability. They were like clear water after years of stagnant, perfumed air. He found himself looking forward to their meetings with an eagerness he hadn't experienced in decades. He would arrive at the park earlier, settling onto the bench, sketching idly until he saw her familiar figure approaching, her well-worn backpack slung over her shoulder. He observed her movements, the way she squinted at the light, the unconscious grace with which she held her charcoal. He noted the increasing confidence in her strokes, a tangible growth he could almost physically feel emanating from her work. He learned about her favorite ramen flavor, spicy chicken, the exasperating quirks of her roommate, a penchant for leaving dirty paintbrushes in the sink, and her secret dream of visiting the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. He listened intently, his expression often thoughtful, sometimes touched by a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He never offered financial assistance directly, a deliberate choice. He wanted to understand her world, not to solve it with the blunt instrument of his wealth. He wanted to experience the raw, unadulterated human connection that had been absent from his life for so long. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elara was struggling with a complex perspective drawing of the park's intricate fountain. Lines blurred, angles shifted, and frustration pricked at her. "It's just not right," she muttered, sighing heavily. "It looks flat, lifeless." Arthur, who had been quietly sketching nearby, leaned over. "May I?" he asked, his voice soft. Without waiting for a full answer, he gently took her charcoal stick. With a few deft, almost imperceptible strokes, he deepened a shadow here, sharpened an edge there, and suddenly the fountain seemed to leap off the page, its stone carved, its water sparkling. Elara stared, her jaw slightly agape. "How did you?" she breathed, looking from the drawing to him, her eyes wide with awe. He merely smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his clear blue eyes, softening the usual intensity in their depths. Observation, child, and a little faith in the shadows. That day, the mysterious connection between them deepened. Elara felt a profound sense of gratitude and inspiration. He was a mentor without even knowing it, a quiet guide whose wisdom seeped into her art and, subtly, into her perception of the world. For Arthur, it was a confirmation of his experiment. In the simple act of sharing a sandwich, a charcoal stick, and a few words, he was discovering a richness of human experience that his vast fortune had somehow shielded him from. He was finding genuine connection, untainted by status or expectation, and it was becoming unexpectedly the most valuable part of his solitary journey. The park bench, humble and weathered, was becoming the unlikely stage for a profound and secret friendship, forging a bond that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could foresee. The peeling paint of the dilapidated van, the faded tweed coat, the callous hands, these were meticulous layers of Arthur Vance's disguise. To Elara, he was simply art, a fellow struggling artist. To the world, he was Arthur Vance, a name that resonated with the weight of immense wealth and an unparalleled legacy in the art world. He was a quintessential reclusive billionaire, a ghost in the high society circles he ostensibly inhabited. His presence felt more through his vast influence than his personal appearances. Arthur Vance wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan. His fortune, amassed through shrewd investments and inherited industrial empires, was staggering, placing him among the most powerful figures globally. But it was his passion for art that truly defined him. His private collection was legendary, whispered about in hushed tones by curators and connoisseurs worldwide. Masterpieces by long-dead masters hung alongside groundbreaking contemporary works in his various residences, sprawling estates that were more museums than homes. Yet, for all the beauty and value surrounding him, a profound sense of emptiness had begun to fester within. The idea for his current project had been born out of this void. He felt suffocated by the superficiality of his world, the constant fawning, the transactional nature of every interaction. He yearned for something authentic, something raw and unvarnished. He wanted to understand the human condition outside the distorting lens of wealth. So, 6 months prior, he had quietly slipped away, leaving behind his retinue of staff, his security detail, and his endless obligations. He traded his bespoke suits for worn clothing, his luxury cars for a vintage, inconspicuous van, and his gourmet meals for whatever simple fare he could acquire. He hadn't told a soul, not his lawyers, not his personal assistant, no one. His disappearance was just another eccentric whim, to those who knew him, a typical Arthur Vance maneuver. He called it his experiential sabbatical. The plan was simple: live anonymously, observe, and most importantly, sketch. He wanted to capture life in its unfiltered form, the everyday beauty and struggle that often went unnoticed from the lofty perch of his privilege. He chose Harrington Park as his base, its diverse tapestry of human activity offering an endless wellspring of inspiration. When Elara first approached him, offering her last sandwich and her precious art supplies, Arthur had been genuinely stunned. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated kindness, untainted by any knowledge of his status. It was a rarity, a precious commodity in the insulated world he usually inhabited. He had seen countless acts of charity from the wealthy, often grand and publicized, but rarely had he encountered such selfless generosity from someone who, by all appearances, had so little herself. Her untainted passion for art, a vibrant, burning flame that reminded him of his own youthful fervor, resonated deeply. He watched her sketch with quiet intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration, her hand moving with fluid grace that spoke of countless hours of dedicated practice. She wasn't creating for fame or fortune. She was creating because she had to, because the urge to translate the world onto paper was an intrinsic part of her being. This genuine, unburdened love for craft was a stark contrast to the often cynical, market-driven art world he typically navigated. His time in the park with Elara became the most profound aspect of a sabbatical. He found himself not merely observing her, but truly connecting. Her struggles, her small triumphs, her unwavering dedication. They reminded him of the foundational elements of life he had long forgotten or dismissed. He saw the world through her eyes, a world where a perfect charcoal stick was a treasure, where a shared sandwich was a gesture of profound empathy. He relished the anonymity. When Elara asked for his name, he offered Art without hesitation, a simple, unassuming moniker that allowed him to be just that, an artist. He loved the freedom of not being recognized, of having conversations where his words were judged on their merit, not on the weight of his name. He found a quiet satisfaction in her respect, a respect earned not through his billions, but through shared passion and simple human interaction. Sometimes, a flicker of concern would cross his mind. What if his identity was discovered? What would be the implications for Elara, for his project? But he quickly pushed these thoughts aside. The authenticity of these encounters was too valuable to jeopardize. He was a master of discretion, and he trusted his ability to maintain his cover. As the weeks turned into months, Elara's presence became an unexpected anchor in his disguised life. He hadn't anticipated forming such a genuine bond, but her youthful spirit, her resilience, and her pure love for art had chipped away at the reclusive billionaire's carefully constructed shell. He was learning, not just about the world outside his mansion, but about himself. He was rediscovering the simple joys, the profound connections that wealth often obscured. And as Elara continued to pour her heart onto her canvases, oblivious of the true identity of her quiet mentor, Arthur Vance knew that this unique connection was becoming far more valuable than any masterpiece in his collection. He just hadn't yet fully grasped the ethical tightrope he would soon have to walk. The notice appeared on the Art Academy's main bulletin board like a beacon in Elara's perpetually overcast financial skies. The Harrington Grand Art Prize. The poster, sleek and understated, listed the prize, a full scholarship for the final year of her degree, a solo exhibition at the prestigious Vance Gallery, and a substantial cash award to kickstart a professional career. It was everything Elara had ever dreamed of, condensed into a single, tantalizing opportunity. She stared at the announcement, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't just a competition. It was a lifeline, a gleaming pathway out of the relentless struggle that often threatened to drown her artistic spirit. The thought of being able to buy decent canvases without guilt, to afford brushes that didn't shed bristles, to eat 3 square meals a day without calculating every calorie and penny. It was almost too much to conceive. And a solo exhibition at the Vance Gallery? That was the stuff of legends, a place where only the most revered and established artists ever displayed their work. A small, cynical voice in her head, born of countless rejections and setbacks, whispered doubts. "You're not good enough," it hissed. "There will be hundreds of better artists with more resources, more connections." She remembered the pristine studios of her wealthier classmates, their unlimited supply of imported pigments, their art history tutors who were former museum directors. Her own studio was a corner of her cramped bedroom, her resources a worn-out set of pastels, and a dream fueled by sheer stubbornness. But then, another voice, softer but more insistent, pushed back. It was a voice of her passion, the deep-seated need to create that had sustained her through every hardship. It was the echo of Arthur's words. If it doesn't burn within you, it won't ignite in the viewer. And it burned fiercely. She thought of the park, of the quiet hours spent with Art, of his discerning eye and insightful comments that always seemed to unlock something new in her perception. He had seen something in her, a spark, a potential. If he, a man who seemed to live purely for art, could see it, then maybe she wasn't entirely deluding herself. The competition theme was broad, the unseen city. It allowed for myriad interpretations, from hidden alleyways to forgotten emotions within the urban sprawl. Elara felt a surge of inspiration. She knew her city, not just its grand monuments, but its gritty underbelly, its quiet moments of human connection, its overlooked beauty. She thought of the lone musician in the subway, the homeless man sharing his meager meal with a stray dog, the silent communication between strangers on a crowded bus. These were the unseen elements she wanted to capture. The application process itself was daunting. A portfolio review, a preliminary sketch submission, an artist statement that felt like bearing her soul on paper. She spent days refining her statement, agonizing over every word, trying to articulate the fire that drove her. She sketched dozens of preliminary ideas, filling her worn sketchbook with quick charcoal studies, each one pushing her closer to the core of her vision. Her roommate, Maya, an abstract sculptor whose work involved enormous, often noisy metal pieces, found Elara's intense focus amusing. "Still slaving away, Elara?" Maya would call out, her hands smeared with rust. "Trying to outbrood all the other tortured artists?" Elara would just offer a tired smile. Something like that. "This is my shot, Maya. My only shot." Maya, for all her jaded humor, understood. She knew the precarious tightrope Elara walked, the constant struggle to keep her artistic dream alive while simply surviving. "Well, don't forget to eat," she'd remind her, sometimes leaving a half-eaten bag of chips by Elara's easel. As the deadline for the preliminary submission loomed, Elara worked with an almost feverish intensity. Sleep became a luxury, meals an afterthought. Her small room, usually neat, became a chaos of charcoal dust, discarded sketches, and half-empty coffee mugs. She chose her favorite charcoal piece, a poignant depiction of an elderly couple sharing a moment of quiet tenderness on a park bench, the city's towering buildings blurred in the background, hinting at their unseen stories. It was a piece she felt captured the essence of the unseen city, the human connection that often went unnoticed amidst the urban hustle. It was, incidentally, also a piece where she'd used some of the very charcoal sticks she'd shared with Arthur. The day she finally submitted her portfolio, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. It was done. The fate of her artistic future, perhaps even her entire future, now rested in the hands of an anonymous judging panel. She walked home from the academy through the park, the setting sun painting the sky in familiar hues. She didn't see Art that day, but she felt his quiet presence, his unspoken encouragement, like a gentle hand on her shoulder. The wait was agonizing. Every email notification, every phone call sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She tried to distract herself with her regular academy assignments, but her mind kept replaying every line, every shade, every word of her artist statement. The dream of the scholarship, the exhibition, the freedom to create without the constant weight of financial burden, felt so close, yet so impossibly far. She knew this competition was more than just a contest. It was a desperate gamble, a fervent prayer that her talent, her passion, and her relentless effort would finally be enough to open the door to the future she so desperately yearned for. The day of the preliminary judging for the Harrington Grand Art Prize arrived, cloaked in a nervous tension that was almost palpable. For Elara, it felt like the culmination of every late night, every skipped meal, every desperate prayer. She stood among a throng of other hopeful artists in the vast, echoing hall of the academy, her heart thrumming like a trapped bird. Her submitted artwork, the charcoal drawing of the elderly couple, was now just one among hundreds, displayed on a pristine white wall under harsh, unforgiving gallery lights. She tried to remain stoic, to project an air of detached artistic contemplation, but her gaze kept darting towards the doors leading to the inner sanctum where the judges would soon convene. She imagined them, stern-faced art critics, renowned collectors, perhaps even a celebrated artist or two, all possessing inscrutable power to determine her future with a single glance. The sheer weight of their collective judgment felt immense. Meanwhile, in a hushed climate control room a floor above, Arthur Vance took his seat at the long, polished mahogany table. He was one of 5 judges, his presence a tightly guarded secret to all but the Academy's director and a few trusted administrators. For this competition, he was simply Mr. Vance, a respected patron and connoisseur, known for his sharp eye and uncompromising standards. His true identity as the Arthur Vance, the reclusive billionaire whose gallery bore his name, was a detail carefully omitted from his brief bio, a necessary precaution to maintain the integrity of his experiential sabbatical. The other judges were already assembled. Dr. Eleanor Finch, a stern art historian with an encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance painters; Marcus Thorne, a contemporary sculptor whose abstract works commanded astronomical prices; Isabella Rossi, the head curator of the city's largest public gallery; and Professor Anya Sharma, the Academy's own highly respected head of fine arts. Arthur, despite his incognito status, felt a familiar surge of professional detachment. He was here to evaluate, to discern true talent from mere technical skill. The first batch of portfolios was brought in, each piece meticulously handled by white-gloved assistants. The room filled with a soft rustled paper, the quiet murmur of critical appraisal. Arthur, known for his almost preternatural ability to discern quality, leaned forward, his gaze intense. He wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for voice, for originality, for that elusive spark of genius that separated mere craft from true art. He moved methodically through the submissions, his expression impassive. Landscapes, portraits, abstracts, they flowed past his expert eyes. Some were technically proficient, but lacked soul. Others were experimental, but poorly executed. He made small, almost imperceptible nods for those that showed promise, and a subtle shake of his head for those that fell short. Then, a portfolio was placed before him, and something shifted. It wasn't the first piece in the collection that caught his attention, but rather a charcoal drawing of an elderly couple on a park bench. His gaze lingered. The drawing itself was remarkably poignant, capturing a moment of quiet tenderness amidst the bustling backdrop of a blurred cityscape. The play of light and shadow was exquisite, lending the scene a deep sense of intimacy and emotion. As his eyes scanned the details, a jolt, sharp and unexpected, went through him. His practiced eye, accustomed to spotting the minutiae in masterpieces, noticed something familiar, something specific. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was the texture of the charcoal, the way certain lines seemed to break, the particular richness of the blacks, almost a velvety quality. And then he saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible fleck of a particular, vibrant blue pigment embedded subtly within a shadow, a color not typically found in standard charcoal sets. He knew that color. He knew that texture. A memory flashed into his mind. A crisp autumn afternoon in Harrington Park. A young woman with paint-splattered clothes, her eyes alight with kindness, offering him her last sandwich and, more significantly, a handful of her own art supplies. Among them had been a particular set of professional-grade charcoal sticks, and he distinctly remembered admiring their unique quality, their ability to produce that very velvety black. And one of those sticks, he recalled, had accidentally been used after she had been working with a rare, expensive shade of ultramarine blue, leaving a faint, almost invisible trace of pigment. This was her art. This was Elara's hand. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The struggling art student he had quietly befriended, the kind soul who had shown him genuine compassion, was now standing before him, albeit indirectly, through her art, as a contestant in the very competition he was judging. He maintained his poker face, his expression betraying nothing of the internal storm raging within him. He turned to the artist's statement accompanying the piece, his eyes skimming the words. To capture the unseen moments of humanity within the urban fabric, a belief that true beauty lies in the quiet connections. It was her voice, unmistakable, earnest, and deeply felt. Dr. Finch cleared her throat beside him. A rather sentimental piece, don't you think, Mr. Vance? Competent, certainly, but perhaps a touch naive. Arthur paused, taking a moment to compose himself. He looked at the drawing again, seeing it now not just as a piece of art, but as a direct connection to Elara, to the pure, unadulterated kindness she had shown him. Sentimental, perhaps, Dr. Finch, he replied, his voice calm, betraying none of his inner turmoil. But there is an undeniable authenticity to it. a profound emotional resonance, and the technique. The handling of light and shadow is quite sophisticated for a student. He pushed the portfolio gently forward, indicating it should be passed to the next judge for consideration. The other judges nodded, acknowledging his assessment, unaware of the personal revelation that had just occurred. Arthur Vance, the reclusive billionaire and discerning art collector, sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. He had recognized her art, and more crucially, the specific art supplies she had so generously shared. The lines of his carefully constructed disguise and the ethical boundaries of his current role had just blurred into a chaotic, morally fraught tangle. He was no longer just a judge. He was now a secret benefactor, inextricably linked to one of the contestants. And he had to decide what to do next. The air in the judging room, typically cool and sterile, suddenly felt charged for Arthur. The charcoal drawing, Elara's drawing, continued its journey down the table, eliciting murmurs of professional commentary from the other judges. Dr. Finch reiterated her point about sentimentality. Marcus Thorne appreciated the composition, and Isabella Rossi remarked on the refreshing honesty of the piece. Arthur, however, heard their words as if through a thick pane of glass, his mind consumed by the startling realization that had just slammed into him. He was a master of detail, a skill honed over decades of scrutinizing art, distinguishing authentic masterpieces from clever forgeries, and recognizing the unique hand of a master. But this was different. This wasn't about monetary value or historical significance. It was deeply, unequivocally personal. The small fleck of blue pigment, almost invisible to the casual eye, was screaming its truth at him. It was the same shade of ultramarine blue that Elara had been working with on a vibrant landscape sketch the day she offered him the charcoal, a color he now remembered because he had casually remarked on its intensity. He'd watched her dip her brush, seen the excess pigment cling to the bristles, and then, a short while later, witness her generous act of offering him the very charcoal sticks that likely carried that minute, telling trace. His gaze flickered from the drawing to his own hands, resting on the polished table. He recalled the texture of the charcoal sticks she'd given him, the subtle grain that made them unique. He had used them himself, occasionally, during his own park bench sketching sessions, marveling at their quality. Now, that same quality, that familiar touch, was staring back at him from the artwork of a struggling student, a student he had grown to admire and, in a quiet, unexpected way, had become fond of. The implication spun through his mind like a chaotic kaleidoscope. His entire experiential sabbatical was predicated on anonymity, on experiencing life without the distorting lens of his identity. He had found genuine human connection with Elara, a connection born of shared passion and mutual respect, untainted by his wealth. Now, that carefully constructed anonymity was threatened. If he acknowledged her work too enthusiastically, or worse, revealed his connection, it would inevitably unravel the delicate fabric of his disguise. The news would spread like wildfire. Arthur Vance, the billionaire, living as a pauper in a van, befriending a young student, then judging her work in a major competition. The scandal, the media frenzy, the questions about fairness and undue influence. It would be a disaster for the competition, for the Academy, and most importantly, for Elara. Her achievement would be overshadowed, tainted by suspicion. Yet, to remain silent, to simply let her work pass without the recognition it deserved, knowing his own influential position on the panel, felt like a betrayal. He had witnessed her dedication, her raw talent, the sacrifices she made. He had seen the truth and beauty in her art, and now he held the power to elevate it. He subtly cleared his throat, drawing the attention of Professor Sharma. "Professor," Arthur began, his voice even, "could you remind me of the artist's name for this piece?" He knew her name, of course, but asking for it provided a moment to collect his thoughts, to establish a public, detached interest. "Ah, yes, this is from Elara Vance," Professor Sharma replied, glancing at her notes. "A scholarship student. Quite remarkable progress she's made this year. Elara Vance." The name hung in the air, a small, yet significant, piece of the puzzle. Vance. Coincidence? Or some strange twist of fate? He dismissed the thought immediately. Her last name was simply a common one. It was the art supplies, the genuine kindness, the unmistakable style that cemented her identity in his mind. He picked up a small magnifying glass on the table, ostensibly to examine the drawing more closely, but in reality, to give himself another moment to think. His gaze lingered on the faint blue fleck, a silent witness to their park bench exchange. He remembered the simple joy on Elara's face when he'd accepted her small gifts, the genuine connection in her eyes. That moment of shared humanity felt infinitely more valuable than any of the multi-million-dollar acquisitions in his personal collection. He put the magnifying glass down. "Indeed, Professor," he mused aloud, addressing the panel. "The authenticity of this piece, as Ms. Rossi pointed out, is striking. There's a raw honesty here that many seasoned artists struggle to achieve, and emotional depth. It speaks volumes about the artist's perspective on the unseen city. It's not merely technically proficient. It possesses a rare spirit." He spoke with a quiet authority that commanded attention. The other judges, accustomed to his often terse and highly critical assessments, exchanged surprised glances. Arthur Vance rarely offered such effusive praise, especially for a student piece. His words, measured and carefully chosen, were a subtle endorsement, a nudge towards deeper consideration without revealing his hand. Dr. Finch still seemed unconvinced. "Still, Mr. Vance, one must consider the overall body of work. Is one poignant piece enough to warrant a top-tier consideration?" Arthur met her gaze, his blue eyes sharp. "Sometimes, Dr. Finch," he countered, "one piece can reveal more about an artist's potential, their unique vision, than 100 mediocre ones. This artist, Arthur Vance, clearly has a voice, a strong one, and that, in my estimation, is precisely what a scholarship should nurture." His words, delivered with a calm conviction, swayed the room. The other judges began to re-examine Elara's drawing with newfound appreciation, their initial dismissals giving way to more thoughtful consideration. Arthur watched, a silent battle waging within him. He had spoken truthfully about the art, about its merit, but he had also leveraged his influence, subtly, to advocate for the young woman who had unknowingly shown him such profound kindness. He had chosen to support her, silently, from the shadows of his disguised life. The ethical tightrope had just become incredibly narrow, and he knew, with a sinking feeling, that the walk was far from over. The silence in the judging room, once filled with the quiet rustle of papers and the murmur of professional critiques, now felt heavy with the weight of Arthur's internal conflict. He had just subtly yet effectively advocated for Elara's piece, leveraging his reputation and discerning eye to sway his fellow judges. The drawing, a tender depiction of an elderly couple in the park, was now moving forward in the selection process, primarily due to his unexpected intervention. But with that small victory came a tsunami of ethical questions that threatened to capsize his carefully constructed disguise. Arthur Vance prided himself on his integrity, a trait that guided his vast business dealings and his esteemed position in the art world. Fairness was paramount. Yet, here he was, secretly influencing a competition in which he had a deeply personal connection to a contestant. He wasn't doing it out of malice or a desire for personal gain, but out of a profound sense of admiration and a surprising surge of protectiveness for Elara. He saw her talent, her genuine spirit, and felt an inexplicable urge to ensure she received the recognition she deserved. The problem was, his means of ensuring that recognition were now undeniably compromised. His mind raced, dissecting the potential consequences of every possible action. Option 1, reveal his identity and connection. This was the clean option, the one that adhered to strict ethical guidelines. He could stand up, confess his true identity as Arthur Vance, the billionaire, and explain how he had met Elara while living in disguise. He could clarify that his support for her work stemmed from genuine artistic appreciation, not from any prior relationship. But the fallout would be catastrophic. The competition would be thrown into disarray, potentially even canceled. Elara's achievement, even if genuinely merited, would forever be tainted by accusations of favoritism and undue influence. Her scholarship, her exhibition, they would be seen as products of a billionaire's whim, not her talent. Her reputation, painstakingly built through years of hard work and sacrifice, would be irrevocably damaged, and his own experiential sabbatical would be exposed, turning a personal journey into a sensationalized media circus. The thought of inflicting such damage on Elara, the very person he wished to help, made his stomach churn. Option 2. Quietly support her from the shadows. This was a path he had instinctively taken, the one he was still on. He could continue to use his influence discreetly, offering insightful critiques that highlighted the merits of her work, subtly guiding the panel toward her pieces without ever revealing their personal connection. This would allow Elara to potentially win on her own merit, or at least on perception of it, untainted by scandal. Her scholarship and exhibition would be celebrated as legitimate achievements. However, this path felt like walking a razor's edge. Every word he uttered, every nod or shake of his head, would be an act of deception. He would be directly benefiting someone he knew personally, a clear conflict of interest. The risk of exposure was ever present. A single misstep, a curious question, and his carefully constructed facade could crumble, leading back to the catastrophic consequences of option 1. The ethical burden of this secret would rest solely on his shoulders. Option 3. Recuse himself entirely. He could feign illness, or suddenly declare a prior commitment, removing himself from the judging panel altogether. This would remove the direct conflict of interest. But then, who would advocate for Elara's work? His initial impression was that the other judges, while acknowledging her talent, were not as moved by it as he was. Without a subtle push, her compelling charcoal drawing might be dismissed as sentimental or naive, falling short of the final rounds. He knew the competition was fierce, and a strong advocate was often crucial. Recusing himself felt like abandoning her, leaving her talent to be potentially overlooked. Arthur ran a hand over his tired face, the lines around his eyes deepening. The irony was not lost on him. He had sought authenticity, a connection unmarred by the trappings of his wealth. And now, that very connection had placed him in a morally compromised position, forcing him to choose between his personal integrity and the future a young woman he had come to respect. He glanced at Professor Sharma, who was now discussing another submission with Isabella Rossi. They were debating the merits of a vibrant abstract painting. He was an expert at this, at discerning the true value of art. He could see beyond the immediate, beyond the surface. And what he saw in Elara's work was profound. It wasn't just skill, it was soul. It was a reflection of the very human kindness and resilience he had sought to understand during his sabbatical. He thought of Elara, her earnest eyes, her paint-stained fingers, the way she spoke of art with such fervent devotion. He remembered the simple, uncalculated generosity of her offering him her last sandwich. She wasn't seeking anything from him, had no idea of his true identity. She had simply acted out of pure human empathy. Didn't that deserve to be nurtured? The internal debate raged. He was a man of principles, but also a man who understood the nuances of power and influence. He knew that sometimes, to achieve a greater good, one had to navigate a morally gray area. Was ensuring Elara's talent was recognized, giving her the chance she desperately needed, a greater good? He believed it was. He made his decision. He would continue on his current course, quietly supporting Elara's work, using his discernment and influence to ensure her art received a fair and thorough evaluation. He would not reveal his identity. The ethical burden would be heavy, a secret he would carry alone. But the alternative, seeing her talent go unrecognized because of a technicality of his personal experiment, felt like a greater disservice. The tightrope was narrow, the fall potentially devastating, but Arthur Vance, the billionaire in disguise, was prepared to walk it, for Elara and for the purity of art itself. The judging process for the Harrington Grand Art Prize was a marathon, not a sprint. Over several weeks, the hundreds of initial submissions were whittled down through multiple rounds, each one more intense than the last. For Elara, the wait between each notification was agonizing, a slow torture of hope and fear. She'd find herself pacing her small room, staring at her phone, every vibration sending a jolt of adrenaline through her. When the email finally came, confirming she had made it to the next round, a wave of dizzying relief would wash over her, quickly followed by a renewed surge of self-doubt. Could she really do this? Was her art truly standing out? What Elara didn't know was that in the hallowed judging rooms, Arthur Vance was her quiet champion. He operated with precision born of decades in high-stakes environments, his advocacy subtle yet highly effective. He never overtly praised her work beyond what was professionally appropriate, nor did he dismiss the merits of other strong contenders. Instead, he used his unique perspective and profound knowledge of art to subtly steer the conversation, highlighting the nuanced strengths of Elara's pieces that others might overlook. In one round, when a vibrant landscape by another student was drawing significant praise, Dr. Finch commented, "Such a brilliant use of color, truly evocative." Arthur, with a thoughtful hum, might respond, "Indeed, a strong sense of light." However, notice the unique textural quality in Arthur Vance's urban study. The way she captures the very feel of brick and grime, the almost palpable sense of human presence in seemingly desolate spaces. It speaks to a deeper engagement with the subject matter than mere aesthetic appeal. His words, framed as a discerning observation rather than overt praise, prompted the other judges to look again, to consider Elara's piece not just for its visual appeal, but for its narrative depth and unique approach to the theme. He knew his colleagues' preferences, their blind spots, and their pet peeves. He understood that Marcus Thorne valued originality above all else, and Isabella Rossi sought works with strong emotional resonance. He tailored his quiet commentary to appeal to these individual leanings. For Thorne, he might remark on the unconventional perspective or the audacious simplicity of Elara's line work. For Rossi, he would emphasize the raw human connection or the untamed spirit in her subjects. He wasn't inventing qualities. He was merely bringing to light the inherent strengths that Elara's work genuinely possessed, qualities that might have been overshadowed by flashier, less authentic pieces. His influence was profound because it was unexpected. Arthur Vance was known for his stringent, almost clinical appraisals, often cutting through pretension with ruthless efficiency. When he offered measured praise, it carried immense weight. His fellow judges, seasoned professionals themselves, unconsciously deferred to his judgment on matters of true artistic merit. They saw him as a pinnacle of discernment, unaware that his discernment in this specific case was subtly guided by a personal connection he desperately needed to conceal. Elara, oblivious to her secret benefactor, felt a strange, burgeoning confidence. Each notification of advancement brought a new surge of energy. She saw her work through fresh eyes, reevaluating her own skills. "Maybe," she mused to Maya one evening, scrubbing paint from her hands, "maybe I'm actually better than I thought. My work isn't flashy, but maybe it has a quiet power." Maya, ever pragmatic, simply grinned. Or maybe the judges just finally opened their eyes. "Elara, you've always been good." The final round approached, and Elara's piece, along with a select few others, was chosen for the in-person exhibition and final judging. This meant presenting her work, answering questions from the panel, defending her artistic choices. The thought made her stomach lurch. She was an artist, not a public speaker. Arthur, meanwhile, meticulously prepared for this final phase. He reviewed Elara's portfolio again, identified potential questions, thinking through how her answers might be perceived. He armed himself with arguments, ready to subtly counter any lingering doubts from his fellow judges. He couldn't be too obvious, couldn't appear to be playing favorites. His support had to remain unseen, a phantom hand guiding the scales of justice. During the final interviews, Elara was a bundle of nerves. She spoke haltingly at first, her answers earnest, but sometimes lacking the polished articulation of her more confident peers. When Dr. Finch pressed her on the melancholy tone of her work, Elara stumbled, tried to explain that it was more about quiet reflection than sadness. It was then that Arthur, subtly, stepped in. "Ms. Vance," he interjected smoothly, his voice calm and authoritative, "would you say that the melancholy, as Dr. Finch puts it, is perhaps a deliberate choice to highlight the often overlooked emotional landscape of urban life? A contrast to the superficiality we often present." Elara's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding passing through them. "Yes," she exclaimed, her voice gaining strength. "Exactly. It's about finding that human resonance, even in mundane or seemingly bleak moments. The beauty is often in the quiet, unseen resilience." Arthur gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. He had provided her with the vocabulary, the framework, to articulate her vision more effectively. He had given her a quiet, guiding hand, allowing her to truly shine. He watched as her confidence blossomed, her answers becoming more articulate, more passionate. As the final presentations concluded, Arthur felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. He had successfully championed her work, guiding it through the rigorous selection process. Her talent was undeniable, and his support had merely ensured it wasn't overlooked. Yet, the ethical tightrope was stretched taut. He had used his power, his influence, for personal reasons, no matter how pure his intentions. The secret weighed on him, a silent counterpoint to the growing admiration he felt for the young artist he had unknowingly helped shepherd towards her dream. The outcome of the competition was now imminent, and with it, the potential for his carefully guarded secret to unravel. Elara's apartment, typically a chaotic blend of art supplies and discarded ramen containers, now buzzed with an unfamiliar energy. She had made it to the final round of the Harrington Grand Art Prize, a feat that still felt surreal. Her charcoal drawing, the one she poured her heart into, was now hanging in a brightly lit gallery space, awaiting the ultimate judgment. Yet, amidst the excitement, a subtle disquiet began to settle in. She started noticing things, small deviations from the norm, unexplainable advantages that seemed to materialize out of thin air. The first instance was subtle. She was struggling with a new oil painting for a separate academy assignment, a complex still life that required a very specific shade of cadmium red, notoriously expensive and hard to find. She'd scoured every art supply store in the city, to no avail. Then one morning, a small, unmarked package appeared at her doorstep. Inside was a brand new tube with the exact cadmium red she needed, alongside a set of fine sable brushes she could only dream of affording. There was no sender's address, no note, just the perfectly packaged supplies. Elara stared at them, bewildered. Her first thought was that Maya, her roommate, had somehow orchestrated a surprise. But Maya, a sculptor who abhorred painting, just shrugged, equally perplexed. Beats me, Elara. Maybe a secret admirer of your art? Or someone got your wish list by mistake. Elara's logical mind tried to rationalize it. A misdelivered package, a generous mistake by a supplier. But a prickle of unease lingered. Then came the deadline extension. The final project for her advanced drawing class, originally due at the end of the month, was suddenly pushed back by a week. This was unprecedented. Their notoriously strict professor, Ms. Davies, never deviated from deadlines. Elara overheard whispers in the hallway. Davies had some high-up call, something about accommodating unforeseen circumstances. While the extra time was a godsend for a frantic schedule, the reasoning felt vague, almost deliberately obscured. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected to her. The most unnerving instance occurred during a crucial peer review session for the competition's final phase. Her easel collapsed mid-presentation, scattering her prepared materials across the floor. Mortified, Elara scrambled to collect her work, her face burning. Before she could properly react, one of the Academy's senior technicians, a man usually too busy to notice individual students, appeared as if from nowhere. He not only helped her gather her pieces, but swiftly replaced her flimsy easel with a sturdy, brand-new model, perfectly adjusted to her height. "Just a little upgrade," he'd said with an uncharacteristic wink, before disappearing as quickly as he arrived. These incidents, individually, might be dismissed as luck or coincidence, but cumulatively, they began to form a pattern, a quiet, almost imperceptible hand guiding her path. She started to feel like a character in a play, and someone unseen was subtly manipulating the stage. She confided in Maya during one of their rare moments of downtime, huddled over a late-night cup of lukewarm tea. "It's just strange, Maya. The cadmium red, the deadline, the easel. It's too convenient. It's like someone is helping me. But who? And why?" Maya, usually quick with a cynical retort, looked genuinely thoughtful. "Well, if someone is helping you, they're doing a pretty good job of staying hidden. Do you have any rich, secret relatives you don't know about? A long-lost patron?" She offered a wry smile, but Elara could see the hint of seriousness in her eyes. "No, of course not," Elara sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. That's ridiculous. But it feels wrong. Like I'm not entirely earning it. Like there's some kind of benefactor. And I don't even know who they are or what they might want in return. The thought of an influential benefactor brought a prickle of unease. The art world, she knew, could be a murky place, full of backroom deals and quid pro quos. Was she unknowingly indebted to someone? Was this aid a gift or a silent investment with unspoken expectations? The very idea chipped away at the purity of her artistic endeavor, making her feel less like an independent artist and more like a pawn in someone else's game. She thought of Art, the kind old man in the park. Could it be him? The idea was absurd. He lived in a dilapidated van, shared her last sandwich. He was as struggling as she was, if not more so, yet his insights, his quiet wisdom, had felt almost profound. Could he somehow be connected to this mysterious aid? No, it was impossible. The ethical dilemma gnawed at her. She was receiving help, undeniable advantages, for a competition where fairness was paramount. If she won, would it truly be because of her talent or because of this unseen hand? The thought curdled the joy of her progress, replacing it with a creeping sense of guilt. Should she try to find out who it was? Should she reject the aid, even if it meant jeopardizing her chances in the competition? But how could she reject something so intangible, so fleeting, that she couldn't even identify its source? As the day of the final judging drew closer, Elara's unease intensified. The prestigious Vance Gallery, where the final exhibition would be held, loomed large in her mind. It was a place of immense power and influence in the art world. What if this hidden benefactor was connected to the gallery, to the very judging panel? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She was on the precipice of achieving her lifelong dream, but the shadow of an unknown benefactor cast a long, unsettling pall over her potential triumph. The question of whether she should accept this mysterious help and what it truly meant for her artistic integrity weighed heavily on her shoulders. The day of the final judging arrived, a crisp morning that held the promise of either triumph or heartbreak. Elara stood before a charcoal drawing in the magnificent Vance Gallery, a building that seemed to hum with the weight of artistic history and immense wealth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the hushed reverence of the space. The judges, including Mr. Vance, were due to arrive any moment for final interviews and decision. Elara felt a strange blend of exhilaration and dread. Her art was on display, truly seen, in a way it never had been before. But the lingering questions about the mysterious aid, the creeping sensation of an unseen hand guiding her, tainted the moment. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished marble floor, a tired, anxious young woman, clutching a dream that felt both within reach and impossibly burdened. Meanwhile, behind the closed doors of a private viewing room, Arthur Vance wrestled with the culmination of his experiment. The final decision was agonizingly close, and Elara's piece, thanks in no small part to his subtle advocacy, was a strong contender. He had managed to champion her work without overtly revealing their connection, walking the ethical tightrope with practiced precision. But the final act remained, the announcement. As the judges gathered, the Academy director, a jovial man named Dr. Albright, cleared his throat. "Before we make our final deliberations," he began, "Mr. Vance has a statement." Arthur felt a sudden tightness in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. He stood, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his fellow judges. Then, through the glass of the viewing room, he could just make out the figures of the waiting students, Elara among them. "Thank you, Dr. Albright." Arthur's voice, usually a resonant baritone, held a rare tremor. "I have enjoyed my time as a judge for the Harrington Grand Art Prize immensely. The talent displayed by these young artists is truly inspiring." He paused, taking a breath. "However, before the final decision is made, I feel it is imperative that I make a full disclosure." The other judges exchanged surprised glances. Dr. Finch's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. Arthur continued, his eyes now fixed on a point just beyond the glass, where Elara stood. "My name is Arthur Vance," he stated, his voice regaining its usual power. "And for the past several months, I have been living a personal project, what I called an experiential sabbatical. In disguise, my aim was to experience life outside the confines of immense wealth, to truly connect with the human spirit, and understand the everyday struggles and triumphs that often go unseen from my usual vantage point. A gasp rippled through the small group of Academy officials present. The judges exchanged wide-eyed looks of astonishment, their carefully composed expressions crumbling into shock. Professor Sharma, her face pale, stared at him. During this time, Arthur continued, his gaze unwavering, I had the profound privilege of encountering one of your students. She believed me to be a struggling fellow artist, living in humble circumstances. Out of extraordinary kindness and a generosity of spirit I had rarely witnessed, she offered me her last sandwich and some of her own precious art supplies. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That student is Arthur Vance. A collective murmur filled the room. The name, repeated now with the context of his name, sent a new wave of revelation through the stunned listeners. When I recognized her distinctive style and, indeed, the very supplies she had so selflessly shared with me in her competition submission, I found myself in profound ethical dilemma. Arthur explained, his voice ringing with candor. I had to choose between revealing my identity and potentially jeopardizing her chances through scandal or quietly supporting her, knowing it presented a conflict of interest. I chose the latter, believing that her genuine talent and the integrity of her art deserved to be seen, regardless of my personal situation. He turned to the judges, his expression earnest. I want to be clear. I believe Arthur Vance's art stands on its own merit. My subtle advocacy for her work was born of my genuine admiration for her talent and her spirit, not out of any desire for undue influence. However, given this disclosure, I must recuse myself from the final decision. The integrity of this competition, and more importantly, the untainted recognition of the winner, must come first. Silence descended upon the room, thick with the weight of Arthur's confession. The judges, still reeling, looked at each other, then back at the man who was no longer just Mr. Vance, but the Arthur Vance. Outside, Elara had seen the flurry of activity, the hushed whispers, the shocked expressions of the Academy staff. Her heart pounded. When Dr. Albright emerged, his face a mixture of awe and bewilderment, and beckoned her forward, she knew. She walked into the judging room, her legs feeling like lead. She saw Arthur, no longer slumped, but standing tall, looking directly at her, his blue eyes holding an intensity she had never seen. The other judges looked at her with a new, complex mix of admiration, confusion, and perhaps a hint of suspicion. Elara, Dr. Albright began, his voice strangely subdued. Mr. Vance here. He has just made a rather extraordinary revelation. He quickly and somewhat awkwardly relayed Arthur's confession. Elara listened, her mind struggling to process the information. Art. The disheveled man in the van was Arthur Vance, the billionaire, the owner of this gallery, the man who held her artistic future in his hands. The cadmium red, the deadline extension, the new easel, it all clicked into place. Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was solving. Her face flushed, not with anger, but with a complex swirl of emotions. Shock, embarrassment, and profound sense of bewilderment. So, the anonymous help, that was you? She managed to whisper, her voice barely audible, looking directly at Arthur. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, Elara. I saw your talent, your spirit, and I wish to ensure it had every opportunity to flourish. I apologize for the deception, but my intentions were always to support your journey. Elara felt a sudden chill. The joy of reaching the final round, the pride in her art, suddenly felt fragile, overshadowed. But the competition, she stammered, my work, does this mean? The ethical dilemma she had only vaguely considered now slammed into her with full force. Had she truly earned this? Or was it all a carefully orchestrated act by a powerful man? Arthur stepped forward. Elara, he said, his voice gentle but firm, your art stands on its own. Every judge here will confirm its merit. My actions, while unconventional, do not diminish your talent. The question now is not about your art, but about the integrity of the process, and whether you are comfortable accepting a victory that, while earned, now carries this unprecedented backstory. The room held its breath. Elara looked from Arthur's earnest, tired face to the stunned faces of the judges, then back to her charcoal drawing. hanging proudly on the wall. The future she had dreamed was within reach. But it came with a truth she had never anticipated, a truth that forced her to confront the very nature of her art, her integrity, and the unexpected, complicated generosity of a billionaire in disguise. The choice and its profound consequences were now entirely hers.